We've let everyone in. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. Again, this meeting is being recorded. If everyone can keep yourselves on mute unless you're speaking, and make sure that you put in the chat box who you are and what district, and if there's more than one person on a computer or laptop or whatever, to make sure you list everyone that's attending, please. Did everyone get the email with the presentation today? And if you were on Tuesdays, did you get that email too with Tuesday's presentations? Okay, good. All right, it looks like the wait room has slowed down. We have 46 people, so I'm expecting we'll probably get a few more, but we can go ahead and get started. Blair, if you want to do introductions.
Sure, I hope you guys can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you guys for everyone for attending today's QuickBooks training. This is kind of part 2 of the beginner QuickBooks session. I see a lot of repeat screens on my screen. So that's great that we have a lot of folks that also attended Tuesday's session. And as everyone knows, we also have 2 sessions in September for more advanced QuickBooks trainings. Teaching the training or leading the training today is Justine Brem. She is the co-owner and one of the CPAs at Brem and Associates, an accounting CPA firm she owns with her husband in Smithfield. And she has with her coworker, Marianne. They led the training on Tuesday. They are the same team that did the training for the admin ops training session, and we had in person in Stanton back in May of 2019. They did some QuickBooks training then, and since then have kind of helped districts on a one-on-one basis with some QuickBooks and other type of issues as needed. So they are pretty familiar with how districts operate, and they've been really good at recognizing how all districts operate a little differently. And the challenges that presents with, so this training, of course, we recognize that all districts operate a little differently, and we try to be as inclusive and recognize that as much as possible, but this is a little bit more generalized. So all that aside, I'm going to turn it over to Justine. We had a good turnout Tuesday. We have a great turnout today. So thank you guys again for spending your afternoon with us. And I'm going to let Justine just kind of take it from here.
Thanks, Blair. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Justine. I have Marianne here with me. Like Blair said, I do see a lot of the same names that we saw on Tuesday, which is wonderful. Tuesday, we did a lot of foundational discussions about QuickBooks, functionality, reporting, those sorts of things. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on budgeting and invoicing. But we will have some time for questions if there are other topics that someone wants to discuss, or has additional topics to suggest for our advanced trainings that are coming up in 6 weeks or so. So I am going to share my screen and start with our PowerPoint presentation that was sent over this morning or this afternoon via email to everyone. I have lost the chat box. Let me see if I can get my chat box back here. There we go. So I know that the districts, as part of what you are doing and presenting to your board, is your budget for each year. And that's, I'm sure, kind of how your performance is judged by the board as to how well you are able to meet your budget as far as meeting or exceeding revenue and meeting or not exceeding your expenses. So it's essential to have a good, solid budget that you present at the beginning of the year or just before the year starts, so that you're not having to make justifications throughout the year for things that are big deviations from this budget. Or from discussions a couple of years ago that this is another area where some of the districts do things differently. Some of the boards want to see specifically formatted budgets in Excel. Others are perfectly happy and appreciate the QuickBooks budget. So it really varies on a district by district basis. So we kind of have general guidance here on how to put together a QuickBooks budget based on your current year numbers at the time you're doing it, because you're generally probably putting your budget together in the last couple of months of your year, and you're not waiting for the year to be finalized before you do that. So it becomes a little bit of a hybrid of the way that things get put together between using current year QuickBooks reports and prior year QuickBooks reports and kind of merging them together outside of QuickBooks to determine where these numbers kind of logically should be. So if we kind of rolled back the clock a couple months and we were sitting here in May putting together a budget for this fiscal year that just started in July, what we would have done is we would have run a P&L and done so from July 1 of 2020 to April 30th of 2021, assuming that April was the most recent month that we had completed. Then QuickBooks has a wonderful functionality that we actually didn't discuss the other day of being able to export your reports directly into Excel. So if I run a profit and loss, and I do it for the same time period that we're talking about, we have this Excel button here at the top. You can click this and click Create New Worksheet. Then it's going to give you some options. Most of the time, you're just going to decide to create a new worksheet starting from scratch on this project. And so you'll click Export. And here we are. We have this exact same report that we had in QuickBooks here in Excel, where we can manipulate it, create formulas, and do other things to simplify this process a little bit. In this case, as we said, we don't know necessarily what exactly May and June are going to look like for the year. So you can add in a column here that is going to be your May to June 21 and put in numbers that you think are pretty good idea of what the rest of the year is going to look like for each of these items. Some things you'll know without a doubt. Your rent, probably same every month. But some things, especially if you have some other revenue streams that aren't your DCR funding or your locality funding that you know that you are going to be getting during this time frame. Well, thank you, Marta. I will fix that. There we go. That should show you the Excel now. I'm sorry about that. So it does just generate this Excel workbook. It pops up all on its own. It defaults it to a generic name. You obviously rename when you say that. You'll get book 9, book 11. Seems to do like every other number. So you add this column, put in what you anticipate your next 2 months of expenses and income to be. If you know that you get $2,000 a month that's coming in on inflows, we put $4,000 in our income, if that's what you're expecting the cost share income to be. I'm just really picking random numbers here. Maybe this 10,000 would be, and then maybe 2,500 and 1,250. Another 2,500. And then this is just a ballpark of what you think these next 2 months are going to be, so that you can look at a whole 12-month span while you're getting this budget put together.
And that's what I was going to add, and just in case anyone's not a super big fan of numbers, or why you'd add 2 months, or that seems a little random. You know, the whole goal is here is to be able to look at a whole year to project for the next year. We don't really want to make a projection based on only 10 months out of our year. So while those 2 months don't need exact, the point is that we're understating things if we only look at 10 months.
And it may be beneficial to go back into QuickBooks and run another profit and loss that is for the last 2 months of the prior fiscal year. So in this case, we would run a report that is for May and June of 20, so that you can look and see what certain things look like during that time period. Because you may have something that's a more seasonal expense or income flow, and that helps potentially resolve that issue, just to make sure that if you do have something that's not necessarily consistent, you are able to take that into consideration when looking at the budget. I mean, like I said, some things are going to be consistent. Your rent is probably going to be the same amount every month. And that's an easy thing to project. But maybe your electric bill varies depending on the time of year, and the usage was higher in the summer because you're running the AC. And your gas bill might be the inverse if you have one there, your location where you're really not using your gas much during the summer, but you're running the furnace during the winter.
And those of you that have other ways of earning money, different revenue streams, that definitely would vary based on season, I would think. If you're renting equipment or sales.
The rain barrels, maybe.
Rain barrels, right. I would say that, especially in this case, May and June could be big months for kinds of things, and we definitely want you to be able to include those.
So then when you get to this, you will have your numbers straight out of QuickBooks, your estimate for the next 2 months, and then what you can do is you can sum these amounts together using QuickBooks formulas, so that QuickBooks does the heavy lifting with the numbers for you. And the nice thing, one of the great things about Excel does the heavy numbers, one of the nice things about that is being able to just put your formula really in one cell, and then drag and drop, just drag it down through the rest of your column, and it will automatically do that same calculation for you in that entire column. So you're not having to type a formula in multiple times. So that just really speeds up your data entry and your calculations there. So at this point, we would have our annual numbers for every inflow and outflow of what you think generally it's going to be. Some districts may take these numbers for exactly what they are: total income of $233,087.99, and other districts may do some rounding to make it a little bit more general, a little easier to work with the numbers, and maybe take it to either like 233,100, or round it up a little bit more to maybe 235, just depending on kind of your history and what kind of growth you generally see from year to year. If you know that your rent expense is going to go up, you could potentially adjust that for what you actually think it is. If your lease requires you to pay an additional $100 a month each year, well, then you know that you can put in a budget so that it's not a discrepancy once that starts happening. then what, excuse me, we're still both a little bit under the weather here today. A great thing to do is to then, if you have been doing your budget each year and starting with an annual number, to drop in those same numbers in another column here so that you can look at it as a comparison. It kind of gives you a reality check to make sure that things don't have crazy variances, or if they do, you know why. If you've added another revenue stream or had new expenses come up based on the services you're providing, that you can justify that. And it makes sense in some situations to go ahead and put notes in another column. So I would put prior year budget here, total prior year budget, and you would just put your information in this column, and then either in the next column over, add a notes column, and then be able to type in anything that you know that is impacting the differences from one year to another, so that you have this information. You can reference it the next year when you do your budget, or be able to provide it to your board if they have questions. That way you have this data to go back to. If for some reason someone new is to take over, they have this as a foundation to help them when they're coming in and doing this process for the first time. Just catch and ease can be frustrating because you only do them quarterly and you're not doing them on a regular basis. Budgeting can be frustrating because you're only doing this process once a year, and you kind of have to get a feel for it every time you do it.
The other advantage to having this in Excel is that you have this file, and mid-year is always a good time to double check your budget. You know, there may be those that want to check it monthly, but for sure, if you can go back and you create that prior year budget, and maybe you add a column later that's a mid-year check. December comes, the end of December, and you're running into January, and you want to see where you're at. And then if you end up dropping in the numbers for the future year budget here, you have some really good comparisons to take the next year. And if you can see that you're falling short every certain areas, that will give you the data to scale that back. Or maybe you're underestimating your other revenue streams every year.
Or if certain things are costing you more, if you need to go through a process to find a way to get more funding for those items, it gives you the data to be able to support that. Those kinds of things can really, really be useful. So based on what we've been told previously when we've discussed things as districts, really it's kind of at this point where you have it in QuickBooks, you possibly have a prior year comparison, some notes. The great thing is with Excel, we can go ahead and we can work with the raw numbers coming directly out of QuickBooks in our report format. And then you can always go in and copy things over to another tab, do some formatting, make it look very polished and presentable for handing it into the board for them to take a look over it and grant you approval for your budget. Obviously, at this point, this is where it's easiest to make tweaks and changes if they want to see something changed. So until they have given an approval, it doesn't really make sense to go and enter that information into QuickBooks, because you don't want to have to do it and then just change it when they've changed things. So doing the initial drafting in Excel can potentially be a really beneficial piece of this process. So once you've done the budget, submitted it, it's approved, then we would actually go into putting this in within QuickBooks. And I am going to switch my screen back over to QuickBooks. And we're going to close this report. And so budgeting is actually located under the company menu, and then it's under planning and budgeting. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but that's where they've placed that option. So you would then pick that up budget. to actually hit cancel because I think I already had that window open, and we're gonna go and we're gonna see if it'll. So we are gonna clear this budget. So the first thing you'll see is this create new budget window. And it is going to ask you where you want to do the budget for, so it will be for your next fiscal year. So if we were doing this budget back in May for this upcoming fiscal year that just started, we would pick 2021 to 2022. And you are going to have a profit and loss budget. It's going to reflect all of your activity as opposed to a balance sheet budget that is just going to show you where you think your account balances are going to be at the end of the year, which just isn't as beneficial in this situation.
Justine, can you think of any time that anyone would want to use a budget for a balance sheet?
There may be some people who want to see what that end result would be, who are just really focused on account balances.
Okay.
But it's not really a good planning tool all on its own. I really think it needs to be substantiated with a profit and loss budget
Definitely.
as well. So can do this by class as well. That is too much minutia for most things that you are going to be tackling. Your budget is most likely going to be just for your district as a whole, as opposed to being typically for any one class, like we were talking about doing things by class and sheet-based training. Having a budget for each class would probably be too microscopic. And then you would click finish. And we get a budget. So QuickBooks is automatically going to populate some information based on your historic data. We obviously, we don't have that much data file because it's just something that we've put together with a minimal number of transactions to be able to use as a demo file. On your side, if you would go through these steps, you are going to see a lot more results on this when you go ahead and ask it to create the budget for you. However, you're going to likely be changing quite a few of these numbers based on what you've did in your Excel file. At this point, districts kind of deviate as to how they have historically been putting into QuickBooks if they have been at all. Some districts have just put all of their numbers in on the July column and call it a day. They use the annual numbers. Some districts go in and they would go back to their Excel file after they get approval and go in and probably copy some other columns here. Add a sheet. Okay, I've got my total budget, and I'm going to calculate what my monthly amounts are going to be for all of these. So I'm going to take my total, and sorry, I hit a button that popped up another screen on my end, and I did not mean to. So I am going to my monthly total here, or my annual total here, and divide it by 12. And again, I'm going to drag this down so that it calculates my monthly amount. So if I have things that I know are pretty generally even each month, I can take these monthly amounts and put those in each month's column in QuickBooks. If I have other things I know are seasonal, I can adjust these numbers based on when I think they're going to be the highest. You know that I'm not gonna have any equipment rental in January and February, I could put zeros in there and then divide it out by the months that I think it's actually going to be, for example. To make this more added, just so that you're seeing less discrepancies when you do your report. So it really has come to kind of district preference, board preference, as to how the districts have done this historically. So whether you just put in an annual figure or break it out by month. So what we'll do for now is I am just going to do it annually and move everything that I put in August into July. And I hit enter and it thought I wanted to close my screen. So there we go. Hitting enter tells it to close.
While she's doing that, another thing, when she was talking about separating your income by month, I think another time that would be really helpful is if you're seasonal in your offerings for rental, for sale, especially if you don't even offer those rentals in certain months. Make sure you're allocating by the months that it makes sense, so that when you run a comparison, you're comparing real data to real data.
And if you know, so we've had these amounts here are based on amounts that have historically occurred. Well, if you know that something new is going to be happening within your budget, you can enter this in and say you budget $500 a year for accounting. Then it's going to automatically populate that in your annuals as well.
Or maybe you know you've got something coming up that you haven't paid for before. Maybe you didn't have to have printing, but you're creating a new manual for something, or you've decided to do some advertising.
And so we would add $750 for printing. $750 for printing and to cover those items. And also, well, the fiscal year that ended in June of 2021 was probably rather unique in the fact that there probably really wasn't much travel. Obviously, you were attending conferences, those sorts of things. So you probably wouldn't have had much of a balance at all on your P&L for that year. But being optimistic and hoping that things are going to change again here in the near future and conferences are going to start again, and hopefully there will be some in-person trainings in the spring and those sorts of things, that you would go ahead and put in let's say $2,000 conference and convention budget. So this could be one that you know, oh, well, yeah, I think I'm going to spend $2,000 in this fiscal year, but I really don't see it happening anywhere in 2021. I think it's going to happen sometime in 2022. So I'm going to instead put $1,000 in April and $1,000 in May and take out this $2,000 that we had put in July, so that you're not seeing, when you run reports, a discrepancy in that amount, because you obviously know you're not going to incur those expenses until later in your operating year. Does anyone have any questions at this point for getting the budget generated and entered into QuickBooks?
Another advantage to using that Excel spreadsheet is that it's really important that you balance your budget, in that we don't allocate too much to our spending. We don't want our spending to be higher than what we anticipate receiving, and vice versa. Most nonprofits or governmental entities want to balance their budgets. So, and usually, when you're using fund type accounting, you want to try to use up what's been anticipated to be spent. So if you use that Excel spreadsheet that Justine was showing you, you come here to populate that, make sure that you are getting yourself to the point where you're pretty close to balance. You're not overspending, but that you are allocating all of the funds to have a good idea of where you're going to spend them.
Yes, that's definitely the case, because obviously you are going to have the need when you're doing your budget to add your funding accounts for your current year in there if you were tracking it that way instead of using classes, so that you're able to put those projected numbers to the year's funding as opposed to just one of the years that's already happened. You definitely want to make sure that that is reflected properly when you are showing that to your board. And Brianna, I see you have your hand raised. I am trying to.
Yes. So first off, I think, well, at least on my screen, I'm still on the Excel page, not on the QuickBooks page with you guys.
I'm sorry, that's on my,
No worries. And then I have a question. Yep, that's perfect.
right.
I have a question about putting the budget just in the July column.
Yeah.
And I've tried to do that before because really the monthly doesn't work for us since we do spend, you know, different amounts every month. It's really not consistent. And when I've done that before, I can't do the profit and loss versus budget for every month. It has to be for the entire year because the entire budget's just in July. So if I want to do like a August profit and loss exclusively versus like the entire budget, it doesn't work. Is there a way to fix that?
No, that's
Okay.
the downfalls about doing it all in July is that you have to then look at the total year and how you are comparing to the total budget, as opposed to being able to see that is what I thought my month should have been compared to what it actually was, unless you're going to sit down and kind of do it manually, like in Excel, and look at what, okay, 1/12 would have been this, how did I vary compared to that? But if your district really does kind of not really have a predictable flow on a lot of your expenses and your revenues, then that really makes it a lot harder to have monthly numbers that really are useful.
Yeah, that's definitely, I found like the monthly numbers are not very useful for us. So what I've done is just do it manually in Excel, is do the, you know, budget versus each month. So
Are your quarters fairly consistent, or are they also kind of all over the place?
normally our quarters are actually pretty consistent, but is there a way to do that with the budget? Just do it divided by 4?
Yep. So
Okay.
instead of dividing by 12, divide by 4, and then I would put it in for the beginning of each quarter. So July, October, January, and April.
That's very
And then
helpful.
you'd be able to run P&Ls for your quarters and versus your budget and take a look and see what those are looking like.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
In fact, I would say using quarters is probably beneficial for all of you. If you're trying to choose between quarters or yearly, the quarter is going to give you a much better comparison than dropping it all into the year without a whole lot of work.
I agree with that, especially because you're doing so much other reporting that is quarterly. It gives you a better frame of reference compared to the other numbers that you're working with when you're doing your other reports. Your board may also want to see it broken down more. I'm not positive, but as far as kind of your internal tracking and making sure that you feel comfortable with what you're doing compared to your budget, quarterly could be a really useful way to be looking at your numbers.
Also, if you do run those by quarter and then start comparing them to your anticipated budget, all of that data will help you next year when you go to set the next budget. You may find that 3/4 of your income comes in the first 2 quarters, but your spending is higher in the last quarter. And so that would help you to reallocate, and each time you can get a little bit better on setting it up, and then maybe monthly does make sense because you can anticipate a little bit better.
Mhm.
As with any planning tool, the more information you give the spreadsheet and the budget, the more you're going to have to compare it to, and the more accurate you can be in the future, which is really the goal. The goal in the budget is to get close. We know that things change. We know that you're going to have differences compared to what you thought would happen. I think we've definitely seen that in the last couple of years. Nobody could have anticipated the different changes in revenue streams and things being closed down. But over time, the more data you collect to look at for future planning, the closer it's going to get.
Mhm. Just like things we were talking about on Tuesday, where we were saying that some of these things do require a certain amount of time to invest up front to make the process easy in the long run. Budgets are very much the same way. The more time you invest in them, the easier they're going to make the rest of your related reporting to the budgets make more sense and be easier to work with. If you put the time and effort into really getting a great budget in at the beginning of the year, you're going to have much better reports that come from it, and those comparisons are going to have more meaning.
The other side benefit is that, like Justine said, when you're only doing something once a year, it leaves a lot of room for error and trying to remember how you did something. If you're popping in and looking at your budget and pulling those reports on a monthly or quarterly basis, your experience level goes up. And I would say 95% of the people we talk to using QuickBooks aren't even aware of half the reports that they can run and the data and get out of it. So I was talking to someone earlier today who uses Square, and it's the same thing with them. They have a lot of reports that are there that most clients aren't even aware that they have access to. And the more reports you can pull that you understand, the more beneficial it's going to be for you. If you start to realize that you're missing a revenue stream that you could be tapping into 6 months out of the year, maybe I'll use the example Justine talks about, some of you having rentals. Maybe there's a piece of equipment that you could own and rent out the other months of the year that you don't have a revenue stream right now. So the more reports that you get efficient at pulling and understanding, the more helpful they'll be.
And it may make sense to do some more with pulling reports as you are putting your budget together and running some quarterly comparative reports, few years of data, to be able to see if there are any trends that you can identify and utilize to be able to use this for budgeting. Kathy, there really isn't a report that can take place of the attachment E because they really want it presented in that specific report that they have built for you in Excel. However, part of what we did talk about on Tuesday was setting up classes in QuickBooks and setting up your classes to reflect your different lines on your attachment E so that you are able to run a P&L by class that very easily helps you complete the columns on your attachment E for each line. And then running a report for your changes in assets and liabilities, tackle that line on the attachment E. It's really just one of those things where having the foundation, I see you do say that you have the classes set up. So if your classes are in line with your items on your attachment E, then you should be able to just, the P&L for the quarter should show you everything that came in for that matches that line, everything that went out for that class that matches that line. So it should make the actual data entry on the Excel sheet rather simple. And then the changes in liabilities and assets requires a little bit of calculation based on what is so with that state, I just thought by this point in time we should not have to take from QuickBooks and put into a separate spreadsheet for DCR. So that is a DCR requirement. I am not the one to speak to that. That would be Blair, most likely of the attendees today, to be able to give you some clarity on that requirement. It does give them a consistent to look at for each district so that they can compare apples to apples as much as possible with how the different districts do have differences in how they operate and the services that they provide to their districts. I see you on yourself, Blair, so if you want to chime in.
Yeah, so we have looked into multiple options on how to get like kind of a uniformed attachment E to come out of QuickBooks. There's no report that kind of meets that need, but you're right. It's been something that like we are kind of constantly looking for options. I will say we're also you know, exploring some options in how to build you know, like a better kind of like program to help you guys with this. So we're currently looking into options. We've been looking into options. We haven't found a decent replacement yet. Some of it goes back to that, like the QuickBooks reports just don't always print out the way that we are able to see the different types of transactions since we don't have QuickBooks as well. And so that's kind of been like one of the drawbacks is that like we as an agency don't have QuickBooks. So, and access to QuickBooks. So that's kind of been the setback on like, is there QuickBooks reports? Because if we could get into, like if you submitted a report to us, or we could, there's a way that you can like share a QuickBooks report with another user or something like that, then it might be, you know, like a great thing to do. But at this point in time, we've not found an adequate replacement. It is, I do want to assure you though, we're even currently talking about it and behind the scenes at DCR. So it is certainly always on our brains.
This is something where I would love to be able to see districts be able to QuickBooks Online because of the ability to share access so much better. However, I do know that the state imposes certain restrictions on data and security, and that makes it much more complicated to look into that as an option. It would be wonderful if that is something that could eventually happen because the districts would be able to add users to access, and there are what are called reports only users where literally all they can do is go in and generate reports and not have any access to that. So for example, if you were to add me as a reports only user, I could go in and I could run your P&L by class and take a look at that, but not be able to go in and change anything that is creating that report. And things like that would make it easier for us to be able to assist you with your books, to be able to be set up as an accountant user that gives us the ability to log in, see your transactions, and help you with getting things classified, setting up your chart of accounts, setting up your classes, budgeting, those sorts of things where those are the things that we get a sizable number of questions about. And we currently have to work on remoting into computers and doing things like that to be able to assist. And it takes the time because I have to take your time away from when you could be working on something else. Whereas if I was able to get in on QuickBooks Online, I could work on it without having to take your time as well. So obviously that's not a current solution, but hopefully something along those lines will be able to transpire to make reporting easier for everyone concerned. But back to budgeting, as we took a little bit of a left turn, which is perfectly fine. Were there any questions about what we've done with the process of figuring out our budget, putting it into QuickBooks before we look at running budgeting reports? Okay, so since it looks like there aren't any questions at the moment, we are going to jump into reviewing your budget, running reports. So in our report section, there is a section for budgets and forecasts. So first, we have a budget overview report, which as you click through, you pick the year, you pick account by month because that's the standard that we have here. It is going to generate a report that is going to automatically default to the fiscal year to date because it is assuming that you just want to see what has transpired so far for the year. So it shows me, and this is just the budget piece. This is not a comparison at this point. This is just it displaying the budget for this period of time. So because we did go ahead and put everything for the most part in July, it is showing me my full year's budget in July and no data in August. If I select this fiscal year, it's going to show me for every month. And then way over to the right, I'm going to get my total. So I do believe, let's see, if we need to, you can customize this report. So if you were going to do your budget on a quarterly basis, you could go in to customize, and instead of its default of display columns by month, you could click display columns by quarter. And so this is going to show you your quarterly budget, which put everything into the first quarter. So again, it's very much like that monthly budget where it is showing everything in one amount. But if you had divided it out, you would be seeing amounts in each 4 quarters and then your total. So this is just a good report to put in your file, and it kind of is this is my initial budget for the year, supported by that original Excel file. If for some reason you're instructed to adjust your budget during the year, you would still have this original report to go back to. And as we discussed on Tuesday, you can memorize reports. So in this scenario, if you are doing a quarterly budget, it may be a good idea to memorize your quarterly budget report to quarterly budget overview. And then each year you would be able to run the same report, memorize, and not have to go through the customization process. The next report is going to be your budget versus actual, which is going to be the report that you're counting on most of the time when you're doing your budget reporting. Again, it defaults to account by month, and you can click finish. However, we can select quarter on this one as well, which helps consolidate what we're seeing. It also defaults to fiscal year to date. You can change it just like the other one to show the whole year. So in this case, it then also shows us dollars over budget and percentage of budget. So obviously, we don't have any numbers in here for the current year at this point. So everything is going to be under budget, and so we've got we've got a small number in here. So really, you're not have any comparisons with the early part of the year because you don't have the data in there yet. So if you're trying to look at this in July and you haven't recorded any transactions or very few, it's not going to be a wealth of information. But when we're sitting here in April or May and thinking about next year's budget, or just doing your quarterly reports, that quarter's data is going to be much more beneficial. You do have the ability to just run these by your last fiscal quarter as well in the built-in options. So as you're working on your quarterly reporting, this can be a great report to have memorized, to run, and just have it as part of your internal package to show that you're keeping an eye on your budget, making sure you don't have crazy deviations, documenting that you are seeing that has a big swing. For example, if you budgeted $100 for accounting and you spent $5, because you needed more time than what your retainer hours are to resolve something that's been historic in your quick file, then you could document that. And you have reasonable justification for having spent that money. There is another budget performance report that will combine your annual budget year to date with the month you select. So it condenses a lot of the reporting. If you really do want to look at it on a monthly basis, but still see your year-to-date progress and your annual budget amounts, it condenses that information for you so that you don't have columns and columns and columns of data that you don't want to see. It kind of gives you a much clearer snapshot of your monthly results, the budget for that month, and your year-to-date budget versus your annual budget. If you are breaking it down into either quarterly or monthly chunks. If you are doing everything in July, as you see your year-to-date budget and your annual budget numbers are going to be identical. So, yeah, I don't think that you can change the order of the columns. So that is something that if you want to see this presented a little bit differently as far as the order of the columns for some reason, that if you want to see certain columns next to each other to more easily compare them, that is something that exporting to Excel can be really helpful for, because then it gives you the ability to move numbers around, move columns around, so that you can see them in a format that might just work better for you and what you're trying to achieve from the data.
I was thinking if you exported it into Excel, you could add some columns as well. If you were looking at what had not been spent to help you plan for the next month, to make up, for overspending or underspending, a way to kind of project for future months to get yourselves back on track. It would allow you to make notes, but also to make, keep track of what needs to be adjusted to stay on budget.
Yeah, QuickBooks' ability to export to Excel is a really valued tool. It really can be very useful for working with your data and being able to understand it and utilize it in the ways that you need to. We use it quite a bit here at the firm so that we can work with our clients' numbers the way we need them for tax returns and other projects. Marta, QuickBooks is refusing to export to Excel. Oh. Has anyone else had issues with QuickBooks not exporting to Excel? You do have it. Do you have the most recent version of Excel, Marta? And Sheila's question is good too. What your QuickBooks are you running? which, Marta, you are doing payroll within QuickBooks, correct? Yeah, so you would have to have one of the more recent versions. You can only do that within the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's
of-
enhanced payroll, I think is what they call it.
Yeah, QuickBooks forces you to update every couple of years if you are doing payroll in their system, because they stopped supporting that. I think every 48 months, or maybe even 36. Let's see. So it could be, is your Excel installed directly on the computer that you have QuickBooks on?
I think it is. I just through, internet research and stuff, I saw something about like if you uninstall the QuickBooks version and go to like the 32-bit version of the same version number, but the 32-bit version of it, I guess that apparently has worked for some folks who are having this limitation where they can't access Excel, but I wasn't up to tackling that just yet. I was like, I'm just gonna print to PDF and deal with it for now. So
I do see that there is some advice on the QuickBooks forums to contact QuickBooks support. Is that an option or
yeah,
issue that you are having? They might be able to help you diagnose what exactly is causing it. Because I know all the districts should have Excel because you need it to do your attachment E. That shouldn't be, it should be interfacing.
Yeah, I was just hoping maybe somebody out there had that problem and had gone through it. QuickBooks Tool Hub, okay.
So yeah, I would look into one of those options to see if QuickBooks help you clear out that issue. It probably is something rather simple with either reinstalling your Microsoft Office or making sure that Microsoft Office is up to date, those sorts of things.
Back to the budget.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any sort of questions about budgeting before we take a stab at invoicing? All right, so it looks like we do not have any additional budgeting questions. If you do think of something, we are going to do a general Q&A session at the end, so feel free to save it, and we can tackle it at that point. Marianne is going to lead us through invoicing, so I will mostly hand it over to her at this point. Okay, I don't know how many of you are currently invoicing or know much about it. I'm going to pretend that you don't know anything and start from the beginning here. There's a couple of things we need to set up before we can start invoicing, and one of the things is going to be our item list, and the other is our customer list. Now, the nice thing about, get some of these things closed out here. The nice thing about QuickBooks is that typically there's at least two ways to do everything. For some people that gets a little confusing.
but it's also helpful when you're in the middle of something and realize that you've forgotten to set something up. And you most often don't have to back all the way out to continue working where you're working. But I'm going to show you what would be the preferred way to do this. And then when we get into some invoicing and some practice rounds, I'll show you that typically you can add customers and items while you're in the middle of the invoicing process. Best start would be, however, to go ahead and see your items. And if you go to the item list, we'll show you, move some things out of the way here. I set up yesterday in here working on this, some options, and the one I did was consulting hours, but I'm going to help us set up another one. If we come down here to the bottom where it says item, we can edit the items we have there. We can do a new one. We can duplicate things. We can edit those items. We can also delete the items if we are no longer offering that particular thing. Definitely your setup would be specific to your offerings. Obviously, not every location is going to have consulting hours. For instance, here we have a lot of different products. We have tax returns, we have training hours, we have a lot of things that you would not have. So our item list is going to be very different than your item list. So my suggestions here may not be applicable to you and what you have to offer, but I will show you a couple of different ways to add things. So I clicked new item. I have the option of telling it whether this is a service or a non-inventory part. For the most part, those are the two items you're going to be offering. The reason they say non-inventory is because this version of QuickBooks does not allow you to keep inventory. For example, QuickBooks doesn't know that you only have 20 brooms left in stock. They only know that that's a part that you offer for sale, and that's why they specify that it's non-inventory. I would imagine that some of the desktop, Justine, do offer you to keep inventory, or does that require a point of service?
I believe some of the high-level QuickBooks subscriptions do allow inventory. However, the inventory module can be a little cumbersome, and I don't think that most districts are going to have a significant amount of inventory that they need to be tracking, that it doesn't make sense to just keep an inventory log separately.
So for the most part, service and non-inventory part are going to be the things that I would assume that you would be using most. Have training hours that you offer, that you get revenue for. Maybe you want to run your rental that way. For some businesses, separating services and sale of actual items is helpful on the tax side of things. If you have something that you have to charge sales tax on, that makes it nice. Services generally aren't taxed, but materials are. So if you save anything taxable and put that to the non-inventory part and anything non-taxable to a service, that may work for you. Since I already have some service hours set up here as a product, let's set up an item, a non-inventory part. For the most part, you can skip quite a bit on this screen if it's not important to you to track this. These come in handy for actual stores that want to enter part numbers. It makes it more searchable for them. And for most of you, you're looking for something much more basic. And so we'll go with brooms. You can enter a description down here. Most of these things then would appear on an invoice. So anything you want your customer to see or within your own book to be able to see. The other option is to go ahead and add a price to these items. If you want it to default, you can always override it in the invoice as well. So if you have a set price for your brooms, we can set them to be $10, and you can adjust that within the invoice as well. The one thing you are going to have to choose is which revenue account you would like these sales to go to. I would assume, and Justine can back me up on this, I think program income is probably going to be a more general or a revenue income if you have that on there, probably not a cost share fund.
So if we are, for example, I know we're using brooms on this, but if we are a district that's selling rain barrels, we would have rain barrels as our item, and you would likely already have a rain barrel sales income category on your chart of accounts. So if you're offering something new,
And actually, that's a good way to show that right here. Let's change that back to, I'll change that back to rain barrels in a minute. That's a good example since that's something we know that you do sell. You can, as I was mentioning earlier, QuickBooks does allow you to add things as you go. If you don't have the account that you want to make that work, can be added right from this screen. So I'm going to add, it's an income account. I'm going to add rain barrels as my income account here. If you sell multiple items, it could just be sale of items income. It could be revenue.
or if you sell different size rain barrels, you got 50-gallon, 25-gallon, and you want to track the sales of them as different items, but you could have them mapped to the same account for the income.
Yes, each item does not need its own income account. You need at least one income account, and you can have multiple items under that account. This account it's referencing is an actual profit and loss account. Now that I've added that, if we ran a P&L right now, you'd see rain barrels on the P&L. I've added that now as an account, an expected revenue account. Now we've got two different things. We've got some consulting hours as a service, and we've got a non-inventory part of rain barrels. So we've got some items set up now. The next step might be to enter some customers. If you know who your customers are and want to pre-populate, you can do that here. You can do it by adding customers. I can also go straight to the invoice portion and add them there. So sales order. Let's go back. So if we have a customer set up, we can go straight into that customer. Double-clicking takes us into the customer itself. We can add as much information here as we'd like or as little. If you would like to invoice from within QuickBooks, I suggest you at least have an email address. Otherwise, if you're just taking funds, at your location and there's no invoicing is necessary, then that wouldn't be needed either. As you can see with this particular customer, I did a little bit of invoicing and showing some payments. So I'm going to show you down here at Manage Transactions. We can add a new invoice. We can receive payments from this screen. Multiple, and this is not the only way. You can go straight to invoicing as well. But if we already have a customer in here, that's one way to do that. So if we're on a customer, we can go in here to create an invoice. Also, if we realize we're at a wrong customer, we in here and we didn't mean to, we can add a new customer. So from this new customer screen, we can switch that out and realize that we were on the wrong one before. We've now added a new customer. Literally, you only need their name, and potentially, you wouldn't even need that if you know the name. You could still create, you know, a more generic account. And remember, this does not have to take the place of you just depositing funds and putting them straight to that income account. Some of our clients invoice and have a general sales. We have some places that do invoicing, but they also run a register where they don't know who their customer is necessarily coming through the checkout. And so those go straight into that revenue account. And you can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So you can see there's a lot of options across the top here. If you don't think you're going to want to print this, you can print later. It's going to allow you to print it or email it. If you want to be able to email out invoicing, that's definitely going to be important to collect the email from your customer. However, here's our item. We've got, you see, here's our rain barrels. You can type any type of description. Maybe you're not track of which size rain barrels, but like Justine said, you do want to add it for your client. So maybe it's 2 50-gallon. I don't know, is that really big? We don't know a lot about rain barrels. And 2 25-gallons, potentially. The other reminder here is that we talked a lot about class. If you are using your class categorizing, it can be added here.
So if you are selling rain barrels, you are probably going to have a class for that, just to keep all of those transactions separate, your sales, your purchases, so that you have inventory. And then if there are any other related expenses, you would want to be tracking those separately so that they can be separately stated.
Yeah, and like Justine just pointed out, it's good to keep track of those classes, because if we look at the revenue from rain barrels, we have $10,000 in revenue from those rain barrels this year, but we spent $20,000 buying them. We really want to be able to compare the costs for those rain barrels as compared to what we sold them for. So using those classes will allow us on the P&L to look at that
And
separately.
take into consideration if, oh, there was a really good deal on rain barrels, but we had to buy a lot of them to get that price. So we bought as many as we think we're going to sell over the next however many years. Then we would expect to see a situation like that where our outflows exceeded our flows. But if it's happening for another reason, it's good to be able to keep an eye on that and make sure that you're not selling things at a loss and putting the district in. I mean, obviously this is not going to be your biggest source of income, but you're never wanting to sell something at a loss and put the district at a disadvantage, for lack of a term.
Right, for sure. And if we don't have a class set up yet, or we're not exactly sure how we want to handle that, remember when we run those P&Ls, we want to include the on-categorized classes so that we can find these things and add the appropriate classes later. In this case, we had populated for $10, but I've listed them all in the same line. We sold 4 of them. We're going to assume they're all the same. I'm also wanting to show you that I can override straight from this invoice screen. If there is a particular message you want to include, you can add new messages that allows you to populate them here. It also allows you to create invoice numbers. They're calling them pledge numbers.
It's just because we set up this initially as being a nonprofit when we set up this QuickBooks. It's just terminology and semantics.
And so essentially that pledge number is your invoice number. That can be changed. You could, maybe you want to keep anything that you maybe you're trying to keep them separate for whatever reason, and you've come up with some sort of system, it will attempt to continue your system for you once you've created one with the next one. So you can start a process here with a starting number, and then you can save and close. That'll take us all the way out, or save and new. I'm going to save and close. So I've now created an invoice for $40. Now that doesn't mean that anyone has paid anything. What that process did was create a receivable from that customer in that amount. The next step is that we would want to receive a payment against this. So there's, again, ways to do that. We have new transactions. We can receive payments here. We can also open up the invoice. Oh, right here. Here we go. I know I can do this here. There's the receive payment. It's hard when you get used to doing something in a way, it's hard to remember all the different options. But I can also receive a payment right here from this screen. So it really depends on where you're at within QuickBooks. Also, the home screen, when you first open your QuickBooks, allows you a lot of options to receive payments, and maybe that's what you're getting each day. You receive all your payments against invoices. You can also edit this invoice. We can change it at any time. Can make multiple invoices to receive payments against. We're just going to, for the sake of ease and exam, we're going to go ahead and receive a payment now against this. QuickBooks does allow you to use QuickBooks Payments. You can set that up as a credit card processing. I'm not sure what your requirements are, if that would be something you'd be able to do or not. They do have fees associated with them, just like any other credit card processor. Or you can take cash, just like normal payment that's received. We're going to assume that this person is paying us by check. It allows us to include the check number here. It defaults to this amount. We don't have to take a full payment. It could be a partial payment. Maybe you take a deposit, and maybe the person pays the rest later. Regardless, you don't have to apply a payment to the whole thing. We can, in this case, we're going to assume that they've paid it all. We're going to make up a number. Even close. It now shows the invoice is paid. The next step is going to be to, let's say that was our only payment that day. The next step is going to be to go ahead and create a deposit. So receiving that payment didn't automatically put it into the bank account as being expected. And the reason this piece is important is that if I've received payments from 4 or 5 different people in one day and I have a stack of checks, QuickBooks something called undeposited funds. In essence, it's assuming that you've made a stack of all the payments you've received over time, and then you choose which of those you're taking to the bank. That step is important because typically we don't make deposits of a single check time. If you do, you can go ahead and deposit them that way. Otherwise, anything that I have received a payment on would be sitting here in a list, and I can select as many of those as I want. It should total up to the amount I'm taking to the bank. It should total the amount of the receipt that I'm going to get from the teller. It's important also because that's the amount. Let's say I had 3 checks here and the total is $111. My bank statement's going to say a deposit was made for $111, not those 3 items listed outwardly. That makes tracking easier later when I'm trying to compare my QuickBooks to my bank statement. If in my QuickBooks I've indicated that they're all being deposited separately, it makes tracking difficult when I compare it to the bank statement later. So I'd want to select all of the different items that have been deposited and make that deposit. If at this point you realize something's missing, you can cancel out of it. You can go in and enter anything else you've received. Maybe you had a typo on one of the checks, but for certain, you're looking to make sure that this payment subtotal matches the amount of the deposit that you have. Also, if you have multiple bank accounts, it's very important that you choose the appropriate account to deposit these funds. This entry right here is going to send this directly over to the bank register. I'm going to choose this operations account, and then I'll show you save and close. At this point, if I go in and look at my register, we'll see, that's not the right register. That here at the bottom, I have, you see this undeposited funds deposit that was made for $40. That's the deposit we just made. That didn't happen when we received the payment. It happened when we created the deposit. And sometimes that step gets missed. People receive payments but don't follow through with the deposit. One of the things that we added to the PowerPoint were some different screenshots of the different ways to set up customers, the different ways to set up items. If at some point I was working to create, here's another place to go to create an invoice. If I was looking to, here we can choose our customer, we could add a new one right from that screen like I showed you before. If I came here and I decided I did want to sell a broom, or I wanted to rent something out that I hadn't gotten into my item list yet, I can also do that right from this screen. So it is nice that we don't have to get all the way back out of those screens before we can add things. So try to give you some screenshots within the PowerPoint of the different places to go to do that. We talked about receiving payments that can be done from the customer page. That can be done from a new transaction as well. And then again, making deposits, making sure you choose the correct bank account. Another option is from the home page, where from that home page you can enter bills, create invoices. People ask about invoicing. The flip side of invoicing would be entering your bills. That can also be done from within QuickBooks. It really is almost the opposite, I would say. Would you agree, Justine, of
Yeah.
doing customer transactions? The flip side of that is entering your bills. The vendor center is the people you pay. Your customer center are the people that pay you. And works pretty much exact. You can enter bills, which would be the opposite of entering an invoice, and then you pay those bills. Both steps are necessary if you want to use the bill center. It is nice to be able to populate those bills, especially if you have reoccurring bills. You have a reoccurring bill every month for your rent or certain things that you like to be reminded to make sure that they get paid or double check that they get paid. Or maybe they're ACH payments. Maybe you have a direct payment, something that gets paid automatically for you each month. If you enter a new bill, you can also memorize that bill and have it become reoccurring. It's very, very similar to the customer side of invoicing.
you also have the ability to pay multiples with one payment. So if you have something where if you have, for example, an office supply vendor and you order some reams of paper and you're able to be billed for that to pay it later, and then a few days later you order some pens and Post-its, and that's on a different bill, you can make one payment and pay both of those bills at the same time and not have to write two separate checks. But then you have the trail in QuickBooks that shows that you paid both of those bills with that same check.
It does make it nice for tracking, kind of like I mentioned with those deposits and those payments received. It makes it nice to be able to see that I paid this bill. When I click on the pay bills under vendors, this is what popped up. So these are all the bills I've entered. I just entered them right now. So if I choose to pay both of these, my total bill payment is $113. That's what I'll see on my checking account. That's what I'll see comes out. And tracking is nice because I go back. I didn't pay $100 and $13. I paid $113. So that's what shows up on my bank statement. Going back and tracking wise, I can then open this bill payment and see what I was paying for.
And especially if you're writing checks, this saves time. It's checks. I mean, checks are relatively inexpensive, but it does add up. It's less often that you have to order a new checkbook. So anything that you can do that helps streamline your processes, even if it is something as simple as paying two bills with one check, it just helps everything run just a little bit better.
Yep, I can add a reference number. Maybe I want to add in those, and actually I should have added that from the bill screen. I don't think it's going to let me go back. Within the bill screen itself, when I entered those bills, I could have entered the reference numbers. Maybe that's the invoice number that was on the invoice that would help me track it later. You can search pretty much any field that you can fill in within QuickBooks as a searchable field later. So when a vendor reaches out about an invoice, they think that maybe you have not paid. If I filled in that reference number, I can go search by reference number later and look for that invoice to see when I did pay it. It would then pull up that I did pay it with another payment, with another bill at the same time, allow me to know what check number I used. Because down here at the bottom, I'm going to tell it the date I paid. Maybe I'm actually, planning to write the check tomorrow. Excuse me. If I'm going to pay the check tomorrow, I'm indicating that the method is check. I can assign a check number, and again, I want to make sure I'm choosing the correct checking account number, the correct checking account or the correct bill payment account for this to come out of, because this entry will go back to that register. So the point of this is to help you automate some things and get them into the register for you, and that's what makes this helpful. So we want to make sure we're choosing the correct account. That can be changed, however, if you've chosen the correct account and you realize that you got on a roll. I think we talked about this Tuesday, when you kind of get going and you're working all in one account and then realize that you didn't ever change the account. And so maybe you need to change later. You can go back into the actual bill payment to change it, or so here it wants to know what check number did I use. To Bob Jones for $113. It will allow QuickBooks to assign the check numbers, which is not a bad idea if you've started with a particular check and you want to make sure you're not missing checks and that it's continuing in the sequence, but just double check to make sure that they're correct. Often a check gets torn off. We see that a lot here.
And you can do this with ACH as well?
So you could indicate that it was H. It's not going to perform the ACH, obviously, for you, but you could type in ACH and indicate that that's how that was going to be paid, certainly. get a summary here, and then we can go back and pay more bills.
Yes. I mean, if you're only ACHing for retirement or other certain things, then you're not going to be recording it in the pay bill screen anyway, because that's going to be recorded in your payroll liabilities when you're running payroll. And you're probably going into, so obviously the ones for your taxes, your FICA, your Virginia unemployment, and your Virginia taxes withheld, you're probably paying electronically directly out of QuickBooks if you're using QuickBooks as your payroll provider. Otherwise, your payroll provider is likely doing that on your behalf and pulling directly from your account when they run your payroll. I'm not sure exactly how the workflow is for making those retirement contributions on your side. If it's something where you go directly to the retirement account and request that they pull your funds, or if you're going to your bank account and submitting those funds.
And remember, for sure, we want to show how you can use QuickBooks, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's an allowed feature for you within your organization.
Yes.
We can show you how QuickBooks works, but we would not be the authority on if you are allowed to do things that way or not.
Correct. So whether or not you are permitted to use ACH to pay your bill, or if you are required to write a check, those sorts of things are more so in the operations guidance that you're provided. However, the way you can record it in QuickBooks is similar. It's just your check reference number will vary depending on how that payment is submitted. I think so about purchase orders. Let me just do a little looking, because the majority of our clients don't utilize purchase orders. So it may be something that we need to turn on in our preferences. So it looks like if we go to edit and edit our preferences, items and inventory, company preferences, inventory and purchase orders.
So yes, it looks like you can turn that on if you're following us here under edit and preferences, items and inventory. As soon as I clicked inventory and purchase hours are active, we've got some other things popping up here. We want to be warned about duplicate purchase order numbers. I don't think anybody's worried about inventory or pending bills. So now under vendors, we have an option of create purchase orders. And there you go. Again, you choose your vendor, if you want to assign a class. The thing is, I imagine once we do this, we can then turn it into a bill. So that does allow for good tracking. If you wanted to use this process to give permissions, essentially, if you approved a purchase, then you would be able to turn that into a bill. I could see where that'd be really helpful in this
Some
industry.
vendors likely want to have those on file just to protect themselves, to show that that purchase was authorized, but
It would also give you a good history tracking on what you've approved.
Yeah.
And then it's already in your system and approved for payment as well. That's a good question.
And we learned a little something extra in the process.
It's always fun. It also, most of these screens allow you to attach a file, and that's not something we speak to a lot, but I am seeing more and more of our clients use this. It's a wonderful way to save receipts. Maybe you want to save an email. Maybe there was a conversation you had with an employee about giving them permission to purchase something, and you want to attach a screenshot of that to this purchase order as a reminder.
Yeah.
Or a tracking history that somebody says, did you know so-and-so did this?
Yes. Or if the board gives you permission to go ahead and make an expenditure, especially if something that's a bit outside the norm, and you get that in writing in an email or whatever other method, and you want to make sure that that record is attached, then you can go ahead and do that. And then if you or anyone else needs to go back and look at that, there is that paper trail that is there within QuickBooks and isn't relying on necessarily physical folders.
Right. It's just one more place to keep a backup. And then maybe you want to attach the receipt to it later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you work it through its full life cycle, so you would get the permission to go ahead and make this purchase, generate the purchase order, attach that permission to it, send the PO to the vendor. The vendor then processes that, sends the item with their invoice with the PO number on it. Then you record that invoice that comes in from them as the bill. And then
and you should be able to attach the invoice to the bill.
And then when you go and you pay the bill, then you include your check number. And so then it follows it through its whole life cycle of a transaction.
Yep. Definitely. I want to reiterate, there are many places to go in QuickBooks to do the same thing. Not one is more right than the other. So for sure,
it's what works best for you. A lot of people do like to use the home screen, which let's pop that back up here. Let's see if I can come back with all the Zoom windows.
I know we've got all these windows on here.
So we can see the chat box and all that fun stuff. There we go. There's our home screen. So a lot of people really love the home screen, and they use that as their springboard for everything that they do in QuickBooks. Other people like to work off the side menu. Other people prefer your top file menu. And then some people live for keyboard shortcuts. So for pretty much everything you do in QuickBooks, you have at least 4 ways to get there, at least. And then a lot of times when you're one item, like if you're in your invoice, you then can click your receive payments, and so that adds another way to get to receive payments. So a lot of people do like the visual nature of this home screen because it tracks your transaction through its life cycle, like we were just talking about. So you've got your purchase orders, you receive it coming in. If you're tracking inventory using that piece, most of you probably won't actually be tracking inventory. You enter your bills, you pay your bills, you create invoices, you receive your payments. If you're receiving money without an invoice, you just create a sales receipt. And then you record your deposits, you reconcile your bank account. You writing checks you can get to from, I feel like almost every screen in QuickBooks. So it really just does take you through a workflow when you use your home screen. But Some people really do prefer the other navigate. Really is personal preference for how you prefer to navigate in a computer. And that's one of the nice things about it, is it does give you those options for just your particular work style.
It is a good visual, though, for all the different options. Some maybe that you hadn't thought about using, but kind of like that purchase order, when you realize the tracking it can give you, maybe it's worth into and trying out, even if you haven't needed them or used them in the past.
Yeah. So we are now going to move into our final question segment. We have approximately 15 minutes left for questions if anyone has anything that they'd like to discuss. And yes, as put in the chat box, if you have any topics for the next 2 trainings that we haven't already touched on covering, we would be glad to take any suggestions. If there's anybody here that was not here on Tuesday, part of what we have on our agenda for these next 2 trainings is journal entries, including the mileage adjustments, personal use of company cars, recording gain and loss on investments, prior period adjustments when necessary, hopefully not, but when you have to tackle an adjustment to a prior quarter or prior year, dealer discount for your sales tax and working with sales tax liabilities, our wonderful payroll tax, especially those pesky pennies that like to pop up, some kind of focus on attachment E, voiding checks in prior periods, and 1099s. We're also going to take 30 minutes at the end of one of these courses and dedicate it to QuickBooks payroll for the districts who utilize that, since not everyone does their payroll during QuickBooks or in QuickBooks. We want to make sure to not bore everyone senseless who does it by putting it in the middle of a training. So we'll put that at the end so that people can go ahead and move on to some other things while we tackle that topic. Sheila, I do see using transforms options. Within QuickBooks, is that what you're asking with that for recording transfers? Okay, yeah, we can tackle that too. We have added that to the list as well.
And don't be afraid to ask for more topics. We can definitely fit more in. We just really want it to be tailored to what you're doing, so you're not just listening to us ramble about things that may not affect you.
And there's going to be a bit of that just because of the fact that we are talking to almost 50 different districts who do have ways that they do things differently. We're able to isolate things like with the QuickBooks payroll. It's great that we can do that and just spin that off to the districts who will benefit from it. But some of these topics are just too hit or miss to be able to do them in a more targeted fashion. So if no one else has any questions, we've covered all the material that we had on deck for today. If you do have any questions, let me switch us back over here to our slides. Maybe. This is all the way through to the end here. Our information is here on the last slide. You can reach us by phone or email. We did discuss on Tuesday the retainer hours and how the process is going to work for those. We are going to try to keep those until after the advanced training, just so that if what you are having questions or concerns about is a topic that gets covered in those trainings, that making sure that the retainer hours are being used to your benefit as much as possible. I would hate to take up some of your retainer time on something that will then end up being a training topic, and you could have just spent the training time listening to us and resolved the issue.
Yeah, and Justine, if I could jump in on those retainer hours, this is Blair for everyone's benefit. Those retainer hours will open up to districts just after the advanced trainings. The association will be sending out more information about those as we get closer to them once they open up. Each district has approximately 2 hours each for retainer hours, and then after a period of time, a couple months have gone by or something like that, we will then open up any of the remaining retainer hours to just kind of like a first come first serve type basis. But we want to give every district a chance to use their 2 hours before that happens. Again, they won't open up until after the advanced training sessions have concluded, and you can expect more information from the association about that just like almost immediately following those advanced sessions.
And anytime you do need help, if it's just something that's a quick call right now, or if it's something where we're going to be utilizing your retainer hours, if you just call the office and make an appointment, we'll get you on the schedule to make sure that we're able to devote the needed amount of time to Jen. And that way we're ready and in a QuickBooks desktop mindset, because it is a little different, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right answers, and we can work on arranging a remote session if we need to be able to do that based on what your question is. So that is on that side, our confirmation, my email, Mary Ann's email. You can email one of us, both of us, however you'd prefer. And we are more than happy to help you however we can. And if you happen to think of any topics you'd like to tackle for the advanced trainings, also feel free to shoot us an email and we can add those onto the agenda as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Justine and Mary Ann for their time today and for going through what seemed like a pretty helpful session. I think we covered some really good topics this time. Thank you to everyone who logged on for the training today. We had awesome participation. We had some good questions coming throughout. So thank you guys for actively participating. I hope that everybody got something out of this, and definitely check back in for the September advanced trainings, because I think they'll just kind of continue to build on some of the foundations we laid here. So thank you guys. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll hopefully see you in September.
Hey, Justine. Justine, this is Shannon from the association. Do you mind staying on for a second?
Sure.
Okay.